Greetings, greetings, greetings. Today we are getting into the final chapter of a Benny song by Djeli Clark. Last chapter, chapter 20, which was titled A Benny Song, we saw that a Benny was able to free herself from the grasp of the witch priest's agenda, that bloodstone that was tapping into the negativity, the negative emotions that can sometimes well up inside any one of us. Anger, resentment, rage, fear, sadness. It taps into all of that and it pulled her and it had her outside of herself, almost slaying her spirit guides, Asha, Zania, Naomi. But Asha sang her Oriki. Asha reminded her who she really is, her culture, her traditions, her people, her family, who she really is at her core, her highest self. And she was able to remember her name and who she was and break that witch priest curse, that witch priest sorcery. Break that daggone bloodstone. And because she was able to free herself, she was able to help free others. And so now we see the children of night coming back to themselves and reuniting with each other. So this next chapter, chapter 21, is titled Homecoming. Now it's time for them to see what's next, because all of them are children, except for the goat man, his silly self. But yeah, let's see what's next. Chapter 21, Homecoming. The return of the children was a noisy one. They arrived just after sunrise, singing as they passed through the stone wall of the village of Kono. People stumbled out of homes, come to see the unexpected voices. At first, they stood, not believing their eyes. But as familiar faces called out names, there were shouts of joy. Men and women clutched children, crying and exclaiming at their return. A group of older children dragged along a bound Brima who huffed and struggled to keep up. The villagers looked on confused, recognizing him, but not understanding why he was bound. When the children related the tale of who he had been and what he had done, there was shock. Angry shouts erupted, and Brima wailed as he was pummeled by fists and kicks. That might have been the end of him, but the man who was like a chief intervened. He ordered Brima taken away to await a later judgment. The villagers grudgingly listened, and the one-time goat herder was led off. When the returning children told of what Abeni and her friends had done to free them, the anger of the villagers turned to thankful jubilation. Abeni endured endless hugs and kisses. Both Zania and Naomi had remained in spirit form, seeing little need to keep up the charade since the children had seen their true faces. Now, people stopped and fell to their knees, giving thanks and praising the return of the spirits. Both girls looked on uncomfortably. It was certainly a change from their last visit. The day fast turned into a celebration. The villagers brought out what food they had and decorated where they could. Brima, the goat man, had insisted by the witch priest's orders that all masks and costumes related to the spirits be burned, but some villagers had secreted the items away and now pulled them from hiding. Drums were retrieved from where they had been concealed. Soon, music filled the air of the once dead village, giving it a semblance of life again. Abeni sat and watched. This wasn't her home, and Harvest Festival was much more elegant, but it was still the closest she'd been to it in a long time. She turned to look at Fomi, who sat eating while watching the festivities. Sooki was there too. So were Adwe and his brother Danwe. Those stork legs a welcome sight. There were others, all children she'd grown up with. She looked over their familiar faces, quietly putting a name to each. There were some missing faces, maybe a dozen. One was Ikwolo. His absence left a sharp disappointment. It would have been nice to see him again. Danwe said the goat man sometimes sent children elsewhere. He brought other children here too from different villages. Like her friends, these outsiders sat in their small knots, looking bewildered, fright still on their faces. It was hard to think on who they had been, what they had been turned into. The scene made Abeni's eyes tighten. She was glad the villagers hadn't had their way with Brima because she still had questions, and one way or another, he was going to give her answers. I can't believe that's the old woman. The witch, Fomi said. Abeni followed her friend's gaze to find Asha. The girl was jumping and dancing with some masked villagers, locks flying wildly, squealing with laughter. She's not a witch or an old woman, really, Abeni reminded. She's a spirit, Fomi finished, her face wrinkling. Could you tell us that again? Yes, Sooki put in. I could stand to hear it again. And what you learned about our village? The last part brought a hush. Abeni looked about to see the other children staring at her expectantly. She had tried her best to explain on the way back from the pit of all that she'd done and seen, but it had come out in a big ramble, and it was probably too much to take in at once. Maybe she needed to try another way. Would you mind very much, she asked, if I sang it to you? Both Fomi and Sooki eyed her curiously, but nodded. Abeni didn't start her song from the very beginning of her village. That would take too long. Instead, she began on the day it had ended. The storm women. The goat man. She sang of how the old woman had saved her, of a witch's house with its endless rooms and enchanted garden. She sang of returning to their ruined village, of ghost ships and the witch priest's war. She told them of talking pots and sparring with a straw man, of shadow things and an old woman who was not really an old woman, and who became a little girl who was not really a little girl, of meeting a vanishing porcupine spirit and a panther girl in a trap, of bush babies, mimic salamanders, talking doors, and arriving at the village of Kono. She even made up some new verses about fighting the goat man and ending his terror. When she finished, her old friends stared wide-eyed. Abeni, Fomi gasped. You've had a lot of adventures. Like a hero in the stories, Danwe whispered. His brother nodded, slack-jawed. Abeni flushed. It's not all that much, really. You had your own adventures. So Woki rolled her eyes. You're friends with spirits. You carry around a magic bag with magic stones. We just got turned into monsters. Hardly an adventure. Abeni flushed further, fumbling for an apology, but Sowoki's face softened in a way she never remembered seeing before. You came after us. You didn't have to, but you did. You saved us. As far as I'm concerned, that makes you a hero. With a lurch, the girl unexpectedly wrapped arms about Abeni. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Fomi joined her. So did Danwe and Adwe. Abeni watched as all the children of their village formed a circle about her. They held tight to one another, and she gripped them back just as fierce. It was a long time before anyone thought to let go. And do you remember when the chief elder and the old man who keeps time almost had a fight? Fomi asked, grinning. The timekeeper got up on one leg holding a stick over his head and was making this sound like a bird. Whoop, whoop. Abeni clutched her sides, laughing as Fomi told the story. Everyone was laughing. Sooki laughed so hard water dribbled out of her nose. They'd spent the past few hours at this, telling stories of their village. It had started out somber, recalling fond memories. Then somewhere along the way, they'd begun to tell these kinds of stories that made them smile and laugh. Now, they were all trying to think up the funniest ones possible. Danwe and Adwe had told a few. Abeni too, even Sooki, but no one could touch Fomi. She always had the best stories and even acted them out. Right now, she hopped up and down on one leg, flapping her arms and making whooping sounds. Stop, stop, Danwe cried until he wheezed. I can't take any more. Yes, please, Sooki pleaded, giggling as she wiped water from her nose. Fomi sat down, cackling at the mayhem she'd caused. She did love telling a good story. Slowly, the self-satisfied smile on her face faded, and her eyes turned serious. Do you think we'll ever see them again? She asked. The laughter died, as everyone went quiet. Abeni saw the despair on each face, and it tore at her. Even their jokes couldn't hide that for long. She decided to speak up. Yes, of course we will. Every head turned to her. How can you be so sure? Fomi asked in a low voice. Those despairing faces all fixed onto Abeni now, looking desperate for an answer. She almost shrank away from the need in those eyes, but drew herself up to respond. We found each other, she said. If we can do that, we can find them all too. But you said they were taken away, Danwe said, to the ghost ships. He whispered the last words, but everyone still shuddered. That part of her song had chilled them the most. Abeni nodded solemnly. We'll just have to find those ships. It won't be easy, but... We? Sooki interrupted. She had one eyebrow raised. Well, yes. I figured now that we're all together, we'd go after them. She sat up, getting excited. She'd been giving this a lot of thought. Maybe we can break up into groups and search in different directions. The villages here know of other villages. We could visit all of them. Somebody's bound to have heard some news. That way... Abeni trailed off as she realized everyone had gone quiet. They were just looking at her and exchanging anxious glances. What's wrong? She asked. There was more silence. Finally, Sooki spoke. You mean for us to go chasing after ghost ships? To go after storm women and this witch priest? Abeni looked to her puzzled. What else would we do? What else? Sooki asked. She snorted. How about going back home to our village? Abeni shook her head. I told you. It's gone. Sooki shook her head back. No. You said the houses were half burned, not gone. It's empty, Sooki. There's no one there. It's like a place of ghosts. The girl's face tightened. We'll be there. Abeni took a breath. They didn't seem to understand. She tried another way. Someone will have to repair the houses, she said, looking not just to Sooki but the others. Someone will have to plan and then harvest. Someone will have to hunt. You'd need to do all the things grown-ups did. How are children supposed to run an entire village? Sawoki barked a laugh. Listen to you. You want to go hunt down stone women and wraiths that steal away people in the middle of a war, but rebuilding a village is too hard? Benny opened her mouth to protest. It wasn't like that, but someone else spoke. I know how to fix things. It was Adwe. Danway too. We could mend houses. I know how to plant seeds, a girl offered, and when to harvest crops. I know how to spin cloth, a boy spoke up. Does anyone know how to stitch? Soon, everyone was saying all the things they could do. Abeni listened in confusion as they each put up their skills. They were truly serious about this? She wasn't expecting the last voice. I can fish, Fomi spoke the words while staring at the ground, not meeting Abeni's shocked face. Fomi, she said gently, you hate fishing. Yeah, the girl said gently, keeping her eyes to the ground. But I can do it. See there, Sawoki said triumphantly. Abeni shook her head. But our families are out there. Someone has to save them. Sawoki sat down, taking her hand, the fierceness in her voice gone. I wish I could go out there and find them. I wish I had whatever drives you. But the rest of us don't have any magic powers. We don't have spirits for friends. We're not looking for adventures. We just want to go home. She drew a breath. I think that's what my parents would have wanted me to do. Abeni looked around to see the other children all nodding. This talk of going back home was the only thing that broke their despair. She looked to Fomi, but her friends still wouldn't meet her gaze. Sawoki's grip tightened. We would like it very much if you came with us, Abeni. You don't have to go out there hunting after monsters and ghosts. You can come home too. Abeni stared at the girl, unable to answer. In her head, the offer echoed. You can come home too. It takes a heck of a lot of courage, faith, self-determination, self-motivation. Intuition to do the things that Abeni did. And she does have the extra help of Asha, Zania, Naomi, and the magic bag. And even in her dreams, Obi comes to her in her dreams, and her training during her time with Asha when Asha was the older woman. And so she has a certain cachet of courage that the others don't. Also, her journey has built up the faith and belief in herself and the possibility to accomplish the impossible, to find their parents, the elders, the adults, ghost ships. That is huge. But she's already found the children of night, which was also huge. So she has a certain belief about her capabilities that the others do not. They just came from being literally held captive and forced to, damn, that was like slavery, really. So I get why their perspective is so different than Abeni. To Abeni, it's like, okay, we're having this celebration, we're getting rejuvenated, But next up is we're going to find our parents, our elders, our adults. Because how can home be home without our families, But the rest of her peers are like, they've learned a lot being raised by their parents. So Oki had already gone through her initiation. The older boys had already gone through their initiations. So they 13, 14, 15, maybe even some 16 and 17. I don't know. But some of them are older. And so they're capable, very capable, because they were raised in a village where everybody cooked, hunted, cleaned, fished, built homes alongside their elders. So they had the knowledge and the know-how to bring their village back to life, even without their parents and their elders. They just have a different perspective than Abeni. She can't see it without her mother, father, and the other children who, might be on these ghost ships. But that's such a big task. And the witch priest is such a formidable opponent. So I get both sides of it, but I know it's heartbreaking to Abeni to hear this. Let's see what happens. It was late in the day when the celebrating in the village of Kono finally died down. Abeni sat near a fire, lost in her own thoughts. Fomi and Sawoki were some ways off, their heads together talking. It was an odd thing to see. Back home, the two of them couldn't stand each other. She and Fomi had been the ones who spoke quietly together, but now a twinge of jealousy shot through her, but she didn't know what to do with it, so she stuffed it away. Too much had happened between them all for that. Here and there across the village, small groups gathered to talk. Some were families reunited with sons and daughters. Others spoke with children who mingled and shared stories. Asha had come over some time ago to plop into Abeni's lap. Now she lay curled up, humming some new song she'd learned. I wanted to thank you, Abeni told the little girl. Asha stopped her humming. For what? For saving me, Abeni replied. If it wasn't for you, I might have become completely lost to the goat man's magic. Asha smiled. I knew you'd know your song. She had, and it was what saved her. But she needed to say something else. You said before that I was mad at you. I think you were right. I told myself I wasn't, but somewhere deep down I blamed you for what happened to my village, and I blamed you for not saving them. I was mad that I had to take care of you when there was no one to take care of me. The goat man used that anger. He would have made me hurt you. Asha looked up at her, those dark eyes curious. Are you still mad? Abeni shook her head. You tried to keep my village safe. You kept me safe. You even made a whole song to remember them because it was your village too. You might have lived alone out in the forest, but you were a part of us. You lost as much as I did. I'm sorry I didn't see that before. She looked out across the village. What happened to our village was like what happened to this one. The one to blame in the end is the witch priest. He and his war are the reason for all this suffering. Someone should stop him. Yes, Asha agreed, and put her arms around Abeni's waist. Someone should. The two sat quiet for a while before Zania and Naomi found their way over and sat down. Their faces were haggard, weary of the attention of the villagers. Damju and her mother followed. So did Fomi and Sowoki, returning from whatever they were talking about. Together they all watched the sun go down, a great orange ball descending into the horizon. It was good to know that there would be no wish song tonight or ever again. It was later, as they sat talking, that Abeni noticed someone sitting alone, his knees drawn up to his chin and eyes fixed on the ground. Squinting through the dark to make him out more clearly, her eyebrows rose. Songu. The boy turned from where he sat to look at her, but did not come over, instead looking back down. Frowning at his behavior, she turned to Damju's mother. What's wrong with him? Damju's mother, who had happily been relating a story about an overly clever hare, became quiet suddenly, the smile fleeing from her face. Darkness follows that one, she said, making a sign they'd seen other villagers use to ward against evil. Abeni looked at her in confusion and then to Songu. Darkness? But they had saved him like all the other children. His parents should have been overjoyed. But now that she thought on it, she hadn't seen Songu for much of the day. In fact, she couldn't remember seeing him with any of his family. Why is he alone? Where are his mother and father? Damju's mother didn't answer, looking away and going quiet once more. Abeni turned to Damju questioningly. Abeni, the girl said delicately, Mama told me of what the village suffered at the hands of the children Brima turned into monsters. It was awful. Some of it I can't even believe. Where are Songu's mother and father, Damju? Abeni demanded, not liking the sound of this. A pained look crossed the girl's face, and she shook her head. Abeni looked to Fomi and Sawoki, but both girls were quiet, their eyes fixed on the fire. They're gone, Damju's mother answered finally. Gone? Abeni asked. You mean they left the village? Damju's mother sighed heavily. Not everyone accepted the goat man's, Brima's, rule. In the beginning, some defied him, and he would order his monsters, our children, to teach us cruel lessons. Many were hurt terribly. Those who angered him the most were bound in chains and sold away like goats. Her eyes went to Songu, staring hard. That one, Mosquito, was charged with taking away those to be sold. He carried off wives from their husbands and grandfathers from their families, heedless of the cries of those left behind. When it came time to take away his own parents, he put the chains around their necks without flinching, even as they wept, calling out his name. She shook her head as if reliving the memories anew. A sick feeling came to Abeni's stomach. Where were the people of your village sold off to? She asked. We do not truly know, Damju's mother answered. Brima only boasted that it would be a place of no return, a far and distant land ruled by wraiths. Abeni let out a shuddering breath, squeezing her eyes tight. Ghost ships, she whispered. Your people were taken to ghost ships. Her eyes opened again and went back to where Songu sat. She had wanted to know more about the ghost ships that had stolen away her family, but she had not expected to learn about them like this. You can't know the things we saw, someone said in a low voice. Abeni turned to see it was Sawoki. The girl's eyes glistened with tears that would not fall. The things the goat man made us do. Abeni stared at her friend and then out on the darkened village. Now she saw things she'd neglected before. Some children sobbed uncontrollably as their families held them. In a corner, a boy cradled the bony arm of a grandfather missing a hand. A mother whispered reassuringly to a girl who poked a stick into the fire, staring blankly. Despite the sounds of celebration, this was a village filled with scars. Looking back to Songu, Abeni felt a deep sadness. What will happen to him? Damju's mother shook her head. His remaining family will not have him. Most here scorn him or fear him. To many, he is still Mosquito. But it wasn't his fault, Abeni countered. He wasn't him. That may be true. But the child who does such things to his own parents, the woman shook her head again. Many say he's cursed and should be sent away. Sent away, Abeni recoiled, unable to hide the anger in her voice. Where? This village is all the family he has left. Mosquito will have little here, Damju's mother replied. Abeni glared at the woman, then looked back to Songu. She couldn't begin to imagine what he must be going through, and to have to do so alone. She knew what that was like. We must seem cruel to you, Damju's mother said. But what Mosquito did, his name is Songu, Abeni cut in. The older woman didn't chastise her for her manners. Instead, she sighed. I can't tell you how to feel. I only ask you not to judge us too harshly. We have been through more than you can know. With that, she rose and left. Damju gave them an apologetic look before following. Abeni watched them both go, unable to settle her anger. It's not right, she insisted. None of what happened to us was right, Fomi said tiredly. She and Sowoki hugged each other tighter. Zania walked over, putting a hand on Abeni's shoulder. The wounds of these mortals are deep, she said. They will not easily heal. But it wasn't his fault, Abeni protested. Why can't they see that? The same reason he can't, I suppose, Naomi said, nodding towards Songu. They all looked over to him, and his loneliness reached out across the distance. This is reminiscent of the reality that happened to the people, the indigenous people of the continent of Africa, as it pertains to the European slave trade / colonization, because there were those who were snatched away, put onto ships, point of no return, sent off with the wraiths, and there were those who were left behind to deal with the colonization of the land, the mining of the resources for diamonds and gold and other resources, oil to this day, and being destroyed from the inside out, being told that their spirits need to be wiped away from the land, being told that they need to follow the witch priests, the different religions that had everything to do with benefiting others that are not of African descent, at the same time demeaning and demoralizing those who are of that land. And so after the celebration, the initial celebration, the reality of what's going on with them, the aftermath of the devastation and then being saved from that devastation and where do we go now is a tough time. It brings to mind in America when it was the actual June 19th of 1865, and I hear stories of people literally finding out that they no longer had to serve masters, and like their lives weren't their own. Their life was dedicated to somebody else's needs, wants, and agendas. And so where they stood, some people just threw down what they had in their hands as they were working and walked off those fields. But to where and to what? So hearing about how the different families are dealing with the different people is in a book. It is not something that really happened according to these characters in the book, but it did happen to many, 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 many African people around the globe, both on the continent and in the diaspora. How do you pick up the pieces after being saved? Abeni has thinking about the drive of a Harriet Tubman, how she had a certain drive that although everybody wanted to be freed from the horrendous environment of being enslaved, not everybody had the drive that she had to get free. So sometimes she had to tell people, yo, I'll do A, B, C, and D because we're not going back. So she had a certain type of drive, and Abeni has that type of drive too. And Harriet Tubman was successful in getting people free. And although she had people who worked with her, some people just weren't built for that. So everybody reacts and responds to trauma differently. So Damju's mother, kind woman, very good mother, dedicated to her children, is trying to explain to her why people can't embrace Mosquito. Don't even call him his real name, Songu. They still call him the name that the goat man gave him. And so it's just, that's like the people who, black people who were used as overseers on plantations when everybody got free. Imagine how other black people looked at the black people who did white people's work, who whipped other black people in support of the master. That's what the goat man was like. That's what Songu had been used to do, to hurt their own people in support of the witch priest's agenda. So imagine when everybody got free, imagine how they looked at that person that was just like them, who had hurt them. Come on, man. It's not an easy thing. It's not an easy situation to get over and get past. I looked up the word wraith because in my mind, I have a clear image of what I think those people who ran the ghost ships look like, were like. But the use of the word wraith, W-R-I-T-H, I'm like, let me look it up because I don't know the actual definition of that word. And the definition I found online is, wraiths are soulless creatures who only feel devastating emotions like hatred and despair. They are a type of ghost, but can also be considered to be a type of demon. Though there are instances that wraiths can be considered quote-unquote good, most wraiths are inherently evil. And that definition is fitting to those who ran those slave ships in the book called Ghost Ships. Because I'm sure the people who had their mothers, fathers, aunties, uncles, elders, children, pregnant women snatched away from them, those who saw them being put on those ships, herded into those castles, pushed through the doors of no return. Yeah, wraiths on that ship, those ships. This is deep. This is deep because, again, although it's a book, it mirrors a lot of what really happened to the African diaspora, both on the continent and just all over the world. Most people had gone to sleep when Abeni made her way to the small house in the back of the village. She left Asha with Danju's mother, who had offered a place to sleep to Fomi and Sowoki as well. The villagers had taken in all the children, finding somewhere for them to rest for the night, all except Songu, who they left outside. Abeni had made a point to get him food and a blanket, but the sight of him, curled up there alone on the ground, infuriated her. It was that same anger she held on to as she stood looking at the small house, knowing who sat inside. "Ready?" she asked. Naomi nodded beside her. There were men guarding the small house. Abeni doubted they would let her in, especially at this hour, but she had other means. There was an explosion of pink and the smell of flowers. She was floating for just an instant before her feet settled on firm ground. Blinking past the mist of Naomi's jump, her eyes adjusted to the dark room, fixing on its only occupant. She nudged at him with a foot. "Wake up," she said roughly. Brima shot up, moving to sit. He squinted, then rounded his eyes at Abeni. "How did you get—" "I have questions," she cut in, "and you're going to answer them." He looked at her, then at Naomi. Perhaps it was the sight of two children, or the nervous look on Naomi's face, but his spine appeared to stiffen. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. "Maybe I'll call out," and he trailed off, eyes rounding again as a midnight black panther trotted out from the shadows. Zania stopped inches from his face, baring sharp teeth as a low rumble sounded in her throat. Brima's trembling hands, still bound by rope, went up protectively. "You're not calling anyone," Abeni said, sitting down. "You're going to answer my questions before she gets hungry." Zania growled again, orange eyes flickering. The man quailed. "What do you want to know?" Brima stammered. Abeni sighed inwardly. "So many things." "Tell me how you met the witch priest," she said. He frowned. "Me? I have never faced the great lord." "Don't lie to me," Abeni said hotly. "He gave you your powers." Zania growled, echoing her mood. Brima shrank away. "I'm telling the truth. I only met his servant, a thing of shadow." Abeni felt her skin pimple with cold. A thing of shadow. "Tell me everything," she demanded. Brima did. There were lots of stammerings and fearful glances to Zania, but he spoke. He told of tending goats one night, alone outside the village, of seeing a shadow with wings move across the sky, a shadow that dropped to the ground and took the shape of a tall man. Of the way it spoke to him, many voices at once, how it seemed to know him, his life and history, of his hurt and how he was treated, and it had promised him great power if he did its master's bidding. So I did, he finished, just like it asked. I became strong, someone to be feared. He said the last part proudly, and Abeni had the urge to ask Zania to growl. Why did it want you to take the children, she asked. To make them monsters? He nodded. The shadow thing said a spirit lived here. Taking the children away would break it. Turning them to monsters would kill it. You wanted to kill a spirit? Naomi asked, hurt and shock in her voice. Brima shrugged, indifferent. What have any of you ever done for me? Everything is about you, isn't it? Abeni said. She really disliked this man. He twisted to regard her, scowling. You don't know anything about me or my life. Before she could reply, he went on. They bought me, you know, the people of this village. I was sold by a family I barely remember to pay off a debt, and sold more times than I can remember until I came to this village. I was just a boy then. They promised the family would take me in, make me a son, but instead I was sent from house to house to be scorned, laughed at, to work. They called me useless and put me out to herding goats. Taught their children to mock me, told them I was no one. A burning lit his eyes, and it wasn't the witch priest's power. It was an anger, long held and simmering. The shadow thing knew all of this, and when it made its offer, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Abeni stared at the man, trying to sort through the knot of feelings in her head. The life Brima described sounded horrible. No one should be treated that way. But what he had done in return seemed worse. How could that be excused? It was Naomi who spoke. I'm sorry you were hurt, she told him. There was a gentle sincerity in her voice. That should not have happened. Brima looked to the porcupine girl in surprise, as if no one had ever said such a thing to him before. Something in his face slackened, and the light in his eyes dimmed slightly. But that doesn't mean, Naomi continued, that you have the right to hurt others. His face drew tight, the burning light returning. I took my vengeance, and I would do so again. Abeni found herself feeling something she hadn't expected. Not for this man. Pity. She couldn't help but wonder if this village had treated him differently, could all of this have been avoided? Could all this hurt and suffering not have happened if one little boy had been treated better? When she spoke again, her words were no longer voiced as threats. Why did you come to my village that day? So far away. Brima shrugged. I did as I was told. I went where I was ordered. The great Lord bade me to bring him more children to make monsters, to build him an army. I didn't question his reasoning. Abeni thought she knew the answer. Asha. The witch priest had sent his army to snatch away the people she protected. Send them to ghost ships, and then take the children for monsters. Perhaps he thought that loss might destroy her as it had the spirit of this valley. Is the shadow thing the one that told you of ghost ships? Brima gave her a curious look. You know of the ghost ships? I know that you sent people there. Tell me about them. All I've ever heard of ghost ships is that the great Lord barters the living to the wraiths who sail them, he said. I was never told more than that. You had your monsters take people to them, she said, frustrated. You must know something. Bremer laughed. I never saw a ghost ship with my own eyes. I do not even know where they are. My monsters took the villagers to other servants of the witch priest, and they took them to others, and so on. Those I sold away will pass through many hands before ever arriving at a ghost ship. He leaned forward. Do you have an idea how many serve the great Lord? Can you begin to comprehend the lands my master now holds under his sway, the reach of his power? Ebony felt her hopes dashed and tried not to shudder at the gleam in his eyes, but there was more he could tell her. Some of the children you took, you sent them away from here. Where? To the great Lord, he answered, sitting back. Sent to deliver his gems. He kept them? He shrugged again as if not caring. So I assumed. Poor Iquolo, Ebony thought. Was that where he'd gone? I was to build an army, Bremer went on. So what was it to lose a few stock? 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 Ebony jumped up, pushing past Zania to get into his face, and he reared back. They're my friends, she yelled, not your fucking goats. She didn't say fucking, that was me. Naomi's hand on her back calmed her trembling, and outside they could hear the guards' shouts. She'd been too loud. Her eyes pinned Bremer where he sat, and when she spoke again, all the threat and hardness had returned to her voice. Tell me now where you sent the other children, and be quick. Bremer nodded. That's more like it. No need to play nice. You're no better than me, but I don't know where they went. Someplace west, I think. Now Ebony really was angry. That's all you can tell me? Someplace west? His eyes looked over her. It doesn't matter, does it? Surely the great Lord will be seeking you. Ebony stiffened. What do you mean? That small spirit you travel with? Different than these two. He nodded to Naomi and Zania. I could see it when I was still powerful. I could feel it. What does that have to do with anything? Ebony asked. Bremer leaned forward, his gaze eager. What I see, the great Lord sees. What I feel, he feels, at least when I still held his blessing. He will know what has happened here. He broke into a toothy grin. Very soon, you and your spirit friends will be hunted, and there is no hiding, not from him. Ebony's jaw tightened, even as the pit of her stomach fell away. It was a sun-filled morning on which Ebony chose to leave the village of Kono. They had stayed more than 3 days, enough time to rest and prepare. The villagers offered what little food and water they could. Perhaps it wasn't fair, but she still couldn't help feeling anger towards these people. The hardest part wasn't facing them, however. It was facing her friends. You don't have to do this, Sawoki said, watching as Ebony disappeared gourds of water into her magic bag. The others look up to you. We could use you back home. Ebony looked to the taller girl who stood with arms crossed, haughty as ever. Whatever else had changed in the time they had been apart, that hadn't. I have some place else to be, Sawoki. She put on a smile. Besides, you're doing just fine. Sawoki had quickly taken control of the children of their village, preparing them for the long trek back. They were doing their own packing and would be ready to set out in a few more days. Some of the grown-ups of the village volunteered to go along, not that they needed the protection. Ebony's eyes went to the knife at Sawoki's waist, a gift from a local blacksmith. The girl was good with it, surprisingly good. Knives like this were being made for the others. Ebony suspected that all the children who had been monsters would show uncanny skill in handling them, as if their hands carried memories their minds sought to forget. Their ordeal hadn't just left them with scars. She honestly didn't know if that was a good or a bad thing. "You're really doing this?" Sawoki asked. "Heading off someplace west?" Abeni nodded. She had told them what she'd gotten out of Brima. Well, partly. She told them the miserable man had given some vague directions. She left out the witch priest hunting them. That was too much for anyone. "It's not much to go on," she admitted, "but I set out to find everyone stolen from our village. I'm glad I found so many of you. Some of our friends are still out there, though. Our families are still out there. I'm going to bring them back." Sawoki shook her head, muttering indignantly. Going after storm women in ghost ships, someplace west. She turned to Fumi. "Will you talk some sense to her? Maybe you can do better than me. I have to go make sure Adswe and Danwe are telling the blacksmith to stick to knives and not having swords made that none of us can lift. Boys can be silly." Fumi, who had stood by quietly, watched Sawoki stalk off. She turned back to Abeni. The two looked at each other for a long while, then burst out laughing. "I think she's herself again," Abeni said. "How long can you stand that?" Fumi snorted. "Sawoki is going to be Sawoki, but she means well. If she gets too bad, I can still find some itching root to set her right." "Or fish guts," Abeni added. They laughed again, and for a moment it felt like old times, like the day of harvest festival. So much had happened between them. The laughter stopped and a quiet descended. The two stared at each other awkwardly for a moment. Abeni could hardly believe it. When had they ever not known what to say to each other? Before she could make her mouth work, Fumi took her hand. "I'm not going to ask you to come with us." She released a long breath. "I know that once you have your mind set, no one's changing it." Abeni squeezed her hand in thanks. "I wish you could come with me," she said. Fumi shook her head. "I'll stick to fishing, thanks." "But you hate fishing." Fumi made a face. "I do, and cleaning them. Ugh. But I miss home more." Home, Abeni thought. That was why she knew she couldn't go with them. Not after what Brima said. If the witch priest was hunting them, she wasn't going to draw him to her village, not a second time. She pulled her friend into a fierce hug. "I'm going to miss you again, but at least I'll know you're safe." "Go. Have your adventures," Fumi whispered. "Find our families if you can, but you come back to us, Abeni. You make sure you come back home." Abeni nodded, hoping it was a promise she could keep. They hugged for a long time. When they finally broke apart, it was with lots of sniffles and wiping tears from cheeks. After Fumi left, she was still filling the magic bag when Damju's mother appeared. "I wanted to wish you a safe journey," the woman said in greeting. Abeni nodded her thanks, not saying much more. "You will be happy to know we're going to refill the pit," Damju's mother told her. "We want to bury the memory of what happened there, even the bright stones." "But you won't bury the memory of what Songu did," Abeni snapped, unable to help herself. She'd managed to get the villagers to find an empty house for him, but none of them visited him. It was like they were trying to pretend he wasn't there. Damju's mother looked stung, and Abeni blushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, Auntie. That was rude." "I've seen the kindness you offer him," the woman said. "It made me remember who he was before. I've talked to others, trying to get them to see, but they're afraid and still hurt. I might persuade them to let him stay, but I can't promise more." Abeni frowned at that. She was thankful, but what would happen to Songu if he stayed? Would this be his life? Ignored by everyone? Forced to live as an outcast? Hadn't he suffered enough? She wondered if this was what they had done to Brima. What if Songu grew angry and twisted the same way and became a monster like him? No, she wouldn't let that happen. In fact, she'd already come up with a plan. "Come with me, please," she said, dropping her things. She walked across the village to the house where they'd left Songu. A few eyes turned to watch them, but looked away at seeing their destination. The boy was already outside, sitting with his head on his knees. When she reached him, he stared up blankly. Restoring his spirit had not brought back his voice. That wound was deeper. She knelt to talk to him. "You don't have to stay here," she said. "I know what it's like to be alone. You don't want that. I've talked to my friends Fomi and Sowoki. They'll take you with them. You can live in my old village. It's in a forest. I think you'd like it." His gaze followed her gesture to where Sowoki, Fomi, and the other children of her village were gathered. He stared at them for a long while, then shook his head. Abeni sighed. "So you want to stay?" His eyes wandered from her to the village as if he was looking at something that was no longer familiar. He shook his head a second time. Abeni frowned. "I don't understand. What?" His gaze lifted until it met hers and did not look away. "Oh," she whispered, and understood. When she walked back to finish packing, the others were waiting. "What was that about?" Zania asked, raising an eyebrow. Songu wants to come with us," Abeni answered. "I told him it would be dangerous, but I don't think he cares, so I said yes." She braced for a challenge, but the panther girl only rolled her eyes. "Surprised it took you that long," she murmured. "We'll soon have a caravan." "I like him," Naomi put in. "He's a good listener, never once interrupts a story." Abeni opened her mouth to remind the porcupine girl that the boy didn't talk, but decided against it. Instead, she turned to Asha, who sat engrossed in wriggling her toes. The girl looked up and beamed. "Songu!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms up happily. Abeni supposed that was an endorsement. It was late morning when they finally set out. Abeni hugged all of her friends. Saying goodbye to Fomi was the hardest, and both their faces were wet again by the end. She hadn't expected the same from Sowoki, who shifted between fussing at her like a big sister and sobbing, telling her to be safe. The entire village of Kono showed up to see them go. Abeni scanned through the crowd as she said her farewells, searching for Songu. For a moment, she thought the boy wasn't coming. Then he appeared, walking right up to her. She put a hand on his shoulder and smiled. "Songu!" Both turned to find Damju rushing in their direction, her mother leading. She carried something clutched to her chest. The girl had given Abeni endless pouches of herbs and powders with meticulous instructions on how to use each, but this looked different. Reaching them, she held it out. A small flute of dark wood covered in intricate designs. "You used to play this. I thought you might want it again." The boy looked to the flute blankly. Then something in his eyes came alive in recognition. Taking the instrument, he held it in his hand, running his fingers across its length as if conjuring up a lost memory. Slowly, he placed it to his lips and blew. The first sound was weak, almost timid, but it grew clear as he became more certain. Abeni's eyebrows rose at the music that came from the flute. It was slow and sorrowful, but beautiful in its own way. The whole village stopped to listen, going quiet. When he finished, Songu took the instrument from his lips and looked at it in surprise. Then, gazing at Abeni, he did something she hadn't seen him do before. He smiled. "I told you he was good," Damju said. She flung her arms around him in a tight hug. "Take care, Songu. All of you, take care." They all hugged Damju in turn before walking for the last time past the stone walls of the village. Abeni kept looking back at all those familiar faces she was leaving behind until she couldn't see them anymore. They strode out into the valley they'd first entered, what now seemed ages ago, and after a long while came to a stop. "Does anyone know where we're going?" Zania questioned. Everyone looked to Asha. The small girl had gone to her knees and was examining something closely. It was a bright green shoot of grass that peeked up from the dry ground. Abeni knelt down with her. "Asha, what does this mean?" The girl smiled. "My sister, she's returning." "It's very small," Naomi commented, her black eyes squinting. Asha nodded. "Yes, she will need help." Wriggling fingers into the cracked earth, the small spirit closed her eyes, inhaling deeply before sounding a low hum. It echoed through the valley, and the very air seemed to vibrate. As they watched, bits of green pushed up from once lifeless soil. Fresh vines sprouted flowers that opened into a multitude of colors. Leaves sprang up on the branches of shrunken trees. When Asha finished, she opened her eyes to look out on what she had made. It was not the only change. "Asha!" Abeni exclaimed. As the girl worked her magic, her locks had undergone their own transformation, slowly turning from black to ivory, like the old woman's. "Are you all right?" The little girl nodded. "My sister needed my magic. She'll be better now." Abeni stroked the white tendrils. "Did you have to give so much?" "Yes, I told you. My sister is very, very big." She stood up, extending her arms wide. Abeni stood with her and looked out. New life showed everywhere between the dried brown stalks as far as she could see. It would take some time for everything to be green again, but the valley was coming back to life. Then, taking in the small girl's wide arms, she looked again. Really looked. And when she saw it, she gasped. The valley had a form to it. The way it rose and fell and was shaped, when you looked just right, it looked like a woman who lay on her side, curled up around the small village of Kono. Along a rocky ridge, Abeni traced a wide hip. Turning where she stood in a circle, she followed a long torso and up to a shoulder where the outline of a round earthen face was nestled. Fresh shoots of grass covered closed eyelids and bold lips that pressed together in a faint smile. It was breathtaking. "Can you talk to her?" Abeni asked, gawking at the enormous spirit. "A little," Asha said. "Only she's still very weak. Even with my magic, it will be a while before she's strong again. She says she's sorry, but she can't take care of us. Not like she is now." Her small face turned grave. "She warns that my brother will be coming for me." Zania growled and Naomi whimpered. Asha had kept her word about no longer holding secrets. She'd told the two everything, who she was and why the witch priest hunted her. Both had listened in awe. Zania asked repeatedly if Asha was certain, unable to believe the witch priest was a spirit and not a wicked mortal. Naomi had Asha tell it not once but 3 times. Even though she squeaked in fright, it was too good a story to pass up. "What do we do then?" Abeni asked. "My sister says there are spirits who are fighting him," Asha said. "Not as old as us, but strong. We have to go to them. They can protect us," she paused. "But they're far away." Abeni sighed. Of course they were. She turned it over in her head. The choice seemed obvious. "Asha has to get to these other spirits before the witch priest finds her," she told the others. "I'm her guardian, so I'm going to get her there. I'm also thinking these spirits might be able to help me find my family. It'll probably be dangerous." "Who am I kidding? Of course it'll be dangerous." "If you don't want to come, I understand. You have your own families to find. I only ask that you take Songu, get him to another mortal village where..." She was cut off as the boy walked up and grabbed Asha's hand, his face defiant. "Songu," Abeni said, "you don't know the danger we..." He shook his head, touching his chest and pointing at her. She sighed. He had said he would come with her. He wasn't going to be left behind. Besides, he had his own reasons for finding the ghost ships. "I suppose I should go along as well," Zania remarked. That caught Abeni by surprise. "But what about finding your sisters? Your mother? Have you given up on that?" "No more than you've given up on finding the rest of your friends or these ghost ships," the Panther Girl said. She gave Asha a meaningful look. "I meant what I spoke before, of spirits keeping the balance of the world. This witch priest works to upset that. I'm not letting him claim this little spirit for his plans." Her face broke into a crooked grin. "Besides, who'll pull the lot of you out of any trouble?" "I don't want to be by myself again," Naomi blurted. "It's scary out there." "Naomi," Abeni said gently, "with the witch priest after us, it may be scarier." The Porcupine Girl shivered but said, "Better to be scared together than alone." Zania rolled her eyes, but Abeni smiled. Naomi was right. Whatever they were going to face, she'd rather have her friends there, the new friends she'd made along the way. She turned to Asha, who pointed, of all places, someplace west. The little girl sped off, pulling Songu along. Abeni followed with the others. As they took their first steps on this new journey, she began to sing her song, knowing that it was not quite finished yet. Well, the now 5-member team, let me see, we got Abeni, Asha, Naomi, Zania, and Songu, who found his outlet, his release via music. So Asha, the little songbird, Abeni sings her song too, and now they have Songu and his flute with all the little intricate carvings on them. I'm sure they got a little special something in that flute, because Damju got skills too. So, and then she gave she gave Abeni those pouches of herbs. They got all kinds of stuff in their magic bag. I love that magic bag. Like, don't you want a magic bag with all the stuff you need in it to help you along your journey? I like that. But yeah, I like how Abeni was cognizant of the fact that, yes, Brima was a jerk, to say the very least. But he didn't just do it because he was inherently evil, although he did enjoy being on the side of darkness very much because he didn't know anything else. All he knew was being treated like he was nothing, out there with the goats, until the shadow came along and offered him the possibility of being seen. Some people don't care if the attention is negative or positive, as long as they're getting some attention. And so he was coming through. He wasn't weak anymore. He got to tell people what to do. He was serving somebody he thought was so great. I mean, even after everything that happened, he still doesn't see anything wrong with what the witch priest is going around doing. He actually admires that crap. Even after everything that happened, because nobody ever showed him any kind of love. The closest thing he got to any kind of love was Naomi apologizing for how he was treated, because he shouldn't have been treated like that. But people dismiss people sometimes as if they're nothing. And those are the exact type of people that are susceptible to entities like the witch priest. Those are the exact type of people who are open to living out the dark sides of what life has to offer. They don't mind getting into things that might hurt other people because they're hurt. You know that saying, hurt people hurt other people? Now, some people, like Songu, he participated in it, but he felt the shame of it in ways that Brima doesn't. And Songu is dedicated to joining Abeni, kind of like trying to right what was wrong about the things he did in the past. So the village was wrong for treating Brima that way, but people are harsh like that sometimes, and you never know how it's going to come back to bite you if in your behind if you treat somebody real bad. You can't give everybody everything, but you can be kind. You don't have to be mean. But again, some people think I'm above everybody else. Oh, that person ain't nothing. And it's not nice. I can say I've been guilty of treating people bad. And it's still a work in progress. Like being kind of mean, and like if I'm in a bad mood or something, or if I'm driving on the road and cutting people off, things like that, those kind of things add up. You never know what somebody's going through. So the people of the village, I think Damju's mother kind of got it. She did get the fact that they were treating Songu bad. If Abeni would have left Songu in that village, yeah, the witch priest would have came back through and the same thing would have happened all over again. So it was good that he went with them. And the rest of the children were forgiven, and they were, the village was trying to heal. Even the valley was healing, and the green was growing up from the ground again. And Asha's sister wasn't strong enough to help them in the way they needed them to. So they gotta go find some spirits that can help them, because the witch priest is definitely going to come after them. Asha is too strong of a spirit for him not to. He wants her light so bad. He wants her light so bad. So, yeah. The Wraiths, they now have a formidable opponent coming for them, because Abeni, Naomi, Asha, Zania, Songu, they're not going to give up. And thankfully, Asha's sister was well enough to let her know that there are spirits who are willing to help them. There are other spirits who are actively fighting against the witch priest. He sounds like he is very, 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 very strong. That statue, the whole time I was reading about that statue, I was thinking about the statue that's in Brazil, standing up over the rest of the country. How tall is that statue? Huge. Representing one child. Let me not get all into that. But yeah, thank you for taking this journey with me. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Until next book. 1.